What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're working on the AMG GT3 in Project Motor Racing. The goal was simple: reduce the heavy understeer of the default setup, correct the brake temperature imbalance, and make the car faster without turning it into something unstable or difficult to drive. With the default setup, I was running in the low to mid 154s at Nürburgring GP. After making these changes, the AMG delivered a 152.7, and it had more in it. I was actually on a faster lap before I stopped and decided to make the video. Let's look at exactly what changed and how those adjustments transformed the car. The biggest problem with the default setup was understeer. The AMG simply didn't want to rotate enough, and asking for more steering only made the front tires scrub rather than helping the car turn. I also noticed a strange brake temperature imbalance. The rear brakes were getting hot while the front brakes stayed relatively cold. The default setup uses a brake duct setting of 6 at both ends, but equal settings clearly weren't producing equal temperatures on this car. That was one of the first problems I needed to correct. Even with those issues, the AMG was capable of low to mid 154s, so there was clearly potential here. It just needed better balance and more responsive front end. Starting with the tires, the default setup used 21.7 psi at all four corners. For my setup, I increased the front pressure to 22.6 psi while leaving the rear tires at 21.7. The biggest change on this page is the brake ducts. The fronts were reduced from 6 to 4, helping the front brakes retain more heat. The rears went in the opposite direction, increasing from 6 to 8 to give the already hot rear brakes more cooling. That creates a much healthier brake temperature balance than the default 6 and 6 configuration. I left the rear wing at 5 degrees, so the improvement in rotation didn't come from removing rear downforce or making the car aerodynamically unstable. Now on to the suspension. The suspension received the largest collection of changes. I softened the front springs from 1,700 to 1,370 pounds per inch. The rear springs were also softened, dropping from 1,428 to 1,142. That is approximately a 20% reduction at both ends, giving the car more mechanical compliance instead of forcing the tires to do all the work. The slow dampers were then rebalanced. At the front, slow bump dropped from 13 to 7, and slow rebound dropped from 12 to 7. At the rear, slow bump and slow rebound both increased from 6 to 8. This combination allows the front of the AMG to respond more freely while giving the rear more control during weight transfer. That helped the car rotate without making the rear unpredictable. The fast bump settings remained at 6 in the front and 5 in the rear. Front fast rebound also stayed at 10, while rear fast rebound increased slightly from 8 to 9. I also made some major bump stop adjustments. The front bump stop length was reduced from 1.4 inches to 0.2, while its spring rate dropped from 34.26 to 22.84 pounds per inch. At the rear, the bump stop length went from 0.6 inches to 0.2, but the spring rate increased from 11.42 to 22.84. In simple terms, I softened the front bump stop while adding more bump stop support at the rear. This was another part of getting the AMG to use its front tires more effectively and rotate when pushed. Now for the alignment and ride height. Front camber increased from negative 3.50 degrees to negative 3.75. Rear camber increased from approximately negative 2.97 to around negative 3.36 degrees. The front toe setting changed from negative 0.06 to positive 0.06 degrees. At the rear, I made a much larger change by reducing the toe in from 0.29 to approximately 0.07. That substantial reduction in rear toe helped free the car up and remove some of the resistance to rotation found in the default setup. Caster offset also increased from 0 to 1 degree. The AMG was then lowered at both ends. The displayed ride height dropped from 2.4 to 2.0 inches at the front and from 2.9 to 2.4 inches at the rear. The front and rear anti-roll bars remained completely unchanged at 481 and 181 pounds per inch. So this improvement wasn't simply achieved by applying an extreme anti-roll bar balance. Now let's talk about the brakes, differential, and electronics. The default brake balance was 55% front and 45% rear. I moved that to 53% front and 47% rear while reducing brake pressure from 100 to 95%. The lower pressure made the brakes easier to modulate, while the revised bias helped the AMG rotate under braking. Because that sends slightly more braking work toward the rear, the increased rear duct opening becomes especially important. In the differential, preload remained at 80 newtons, but the number of clutches was reduced from 10 to 6. That reduces the amount of differential locking and allows the car to rotate more freely instead of pushing wide when power is applied. Traction control was reduced from 6 to 4, and ABS was reduced from 8 to 6. The final drive and all individual gear ratios remained unchanged. I also made a few steering changes to improve how quickly and clearly the AMG communicates through the wheel. The steering rack rate increased from 1.0 to 1.3, and steering damping was reduced from 3 to 1. I also increased the high-frequency force feedback EQ from 1.0 to 2.0. Strength, rack feel, and steering stiffness remains unchanged. These steering and force feedback adjustments are personal preferences, so feel free to adapt them to your own wheel. They don't create mechanical grip, but they make it easier for me to react to the car and place it accurately. The final result was a 152.7 compared to the low to mid 154s produced by the default setup. More importantly, the AMG now feels like a car I can attack the circuit with. The front responds when I ask it to turn, the rear remains manageable, and the overall balance gives me much more confidence. The setup is saved as 2.2.0.0.1 so that it is the version you'll want to look for when copying the values shown in the video. Give the setup a try and let me know what lap time you can manage with it. If you make any additional improvements, share them in the comments or just join us in the Final Sector Sim Discord. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.